The thunderous crack of the wagon wheel splintering echoed across the vast Colorado plains as Josephine Caldwell lurched forward, nearly tumbling from her seat. Her heart sank like a stone in a well as she surveyed the damage to her wagon 300 miles from St. Louis, 50 miles from Denver, and not a soul in sight except the endless prairie grass dancing in the relentless June wind of 1878. Josephine wiped the perspiration from her brow with the back of her gloved hand, lifting her gaze to scan the horizon. The setting sun cast long shadows across the trail, painting the landscape in a deceptively beautiful golden hue that belied her desperate situation. She had been traveling for weeks, the promise of a teaching position and a fresh start in Denver driving her forward despite the dangers of traveling alone. "Stay calm," she muttered to herself as she climbed down from the wagon, her dusty blue calico dress catching on a nail. She tugged it free with a frustrated grunt. At 23, Josephine had already weathered more storms than most women twice her age. Orphaned at 16, she had worked as a seamstress in St. Louis until the opportunity to teach in a newly established school in Denver presented itself, a chance to escape the suffocating memories and limited prospects of her hometown. She circled the wagon, inspecting the damage. The wheel hadn't merely broken, it had shattered with the wooden spokes jutting out like broken fingers. Her two horses, Belle and Daisy, sensed her distress, shifting nervously in their harnesses. "It's all right, girls," she soothed, stroking Belle's muzzle. "We'll figure something out." But as the final rays of sunlight disappeared behind the distant mountains, Josephine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. She was alone on the trail, with little water and even less food. Wolves howled in the distance, and tales of outlaws and bandits haunted her thoughts. She built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth, and settled beside it, her father's old rifle across her lap. Sleep was impossible, every rustle in the grass setting her nerves on edge. The night stretched endlessly, and Josephine found herself contemplating her choices: stay with the wagon and hope for travelers, or set out on horseback and risk getting lost. Dawn broke with a whisper of pink across the eastern sky, bringing with it a renewed sense of determination. Josephine was repacking her meager supplies, preparing to unhitch one of the horses, when a movement on the horizon caught her eye. A rider approached, his silhouette growing more defined with each passing moment. Fear and hope battled within her as she gripped her rifle tighter. The rider came at an unhurried pace, and as he drew nearer, she could make out the broad-brimmed hat, the lean frame, and the easy way he sat his horse, a cowboy by all appearances. "Hello there," he called out when he was within earshot. "Seems like you've got yourself in a bit of trouble." He reined his horse to a stop several yards away, respectfully keeping his distance. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with a face weathered by the sun but kind around the eyes. "The wheel broke yesterday evening," Josephine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her relief at seeing another human being. "I was headed to Denver." The cowboy nodded, dismounting with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Name's Garrett Quinn," he introduced himself, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Most folks just call me Quinn." "Josephine Caldwell," she returned, lowering her rifle slightly but not setting it aside. "I'd be grateful for any assistance you could provide, Mr. Quinn." He smiled, and it transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Just Quinn is fine, Miss Caldwell. Let's take a look at that wheel." As he circled her wagon, Josephine observed him carefully. He wore simple clothes, faded denim pants, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and scuffed boots that had clearly seen many miles. A pistol hung at his hip, but his demeanor was unthreatening. "It's a bad break," he said after examining the wheel. "But I might be able to fix it enough to get you to the next town. There's a settlement about 10 miles west Willow Creek. Got a blacksmith who could set you up proper." Hope surged within her. "You can repair it. I've fixed worse," he assured her. "I've got some tools on my horse, and we'll need to find some sturdy wood for the spokes. Might take most of the day, though." For the first time since the wheel had broken, Josephine felt the tension in her shoulders ease. "I'm not in a position to be picky about time, Mr. Quinn," she corrected herself. He grinned again. "Then let's get to work." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Quinn proved to be as skilled with tools as he was with horses, fashioning temporary spokes from branches he found near a creek a short ride away. He worked methodically, pausing occasionally to explain what he was doing or to ask Josephine to hold something steady. "What brings a lady like yourself to travel alone to Denver?" he asked as he measured a piece of wood against the broken wheel. Josephine hesitated, unused to sharing her life with strangers. But there was something trustworthy about Quinn, a steadiness that invited confidence. "I've accepted a position as a teacher in the new school," she said. The opportunity to start fresh was too tempting to pass up. Quinn nodded approvingly. "Denver's growing fast. They need good teachers. You've been teaching long, officially. This will be my first position. But I've tutored children in St. Louis for years." She watched as he skillfully whittled the wood to fit the wheel. "And what about you? What does a cowboy do this far from any ranch?" he chuckled. "I'm between jobs at the moment. Was working at the Circle T Ranch near Boulder, but the owner's son returned from back east and took over my position as foreman. I'm headed south to check on some opportunities." Josephine noted the lack of bitterness in his voice. "I'm sorry about your position." Quinn shrugged. "That's the way of it sometimes. I've been riding since I was 14, worked on more ranches than I can count. Something always turns up." He hammered a makeshift spoke into place. "Besides, if I hadn't been on this trail today, who knows how long you'd have been stranded." The thought sent a shiver down her spine despite the warm day. "I suppose everything happens for a reason, as my mother used to say." "Wise woman, your mother," Quinn remarked, and Josephine didn't correct him on the past tense. By midday, sweat streaked Quinn's face as he worked tirelessly on the wheel. Josephine had prepared a simple meal from her supplies: cornbread and jerky, with the last of her coffee. They ate sitting in the shade of the wagon, a companionable silence between them. "Where did you learn to fix wagons?" she asked eventually. "My pa was a wheelwright back in Missouri," Quinn replied. "I spent my boyhood watching him work, then helping when I got big enough. Never took to it like he hoped the open range called louder, but I picked up enough to be useful." "Well, I'm certainly grateful for that," Josephine said sincerely. Quinn's eyes crinkled with his smile. "Happy to help, Miss Caldwell." As the afternoon wore on, Josephine found herself watching Quinn more than the wheel. There was an easy confidence to his movements, a quiet competence that she found oddly comforting. He wasn't what she'd expected from a cowboy, not loud or brash or rough. Instead, he was thoughtful, his conversation intelligent without being pretentious. Finally, as the sun began its westward descent, Quinn stood and dusted off his hands. "It's not pretty, but it'll hold to Willow Creek. We should start now if we want to make it before dark." Josephine eyed the repaired wheel dubiously. It looked cobbled together, the new spokes clearly visible among the original ones, but Quinn's confidence reassured her. "Thank you," she said, reaching for her purse. "What do I owe you for your time and skill?" Quinn held up a hand, shaking his head. "Put that away, Miss Caldwell. I wouldn't feel right taking money for helping someone in need. But you've spent your entire day, and had good company and a fine meal for it," he interrupted gently. "That's payment enough." Josephine wasn't used to such generosity from strangers. "At least let me tell you what," Quinn said. "I'm headed south anyway. Why don't I ride alongside you to Willow Creek, make sure the wheel holds? Then we'll be square." Relief flooded her at the prospect of not traveling alone, even for 10 miles. "I would appreciate that very much." Quinn nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then it's settled. Let's get you hitched up and on the road." The journey to Willow Creek was slow, Quinn keeping his horse at a walk beside her wagon, watching the repaired wheel carefully for any signs of strain. Conversation flowed easily between them as the miles passed, touching on everything from books they'd read to places they'd seen. Josephine found herself laughing at Quinn's stories of ranch life, the time he'd been tasked with breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang, or the winter he'd spent in a lined shack with only a grumpy old cowhand for company. "So there I was," Quinn said, gesturing dramatically, "stuck in that tiny cabin with old Tom, who snored louder than a freight train and insisted on cooking beans for every meal. By spring, I swear I'd have eaten my boots if they'd been an alternative." Josephine's laughter rang out across the prairie. "At least you had shelter. My first winter teaching, the schoolhouse roof leaked so badly that the children had to huddle under umbrellas inside," Quinn chuckled. "I imagine that made arithmetic lessons interesting. Very. Especially when Jimmy Hawkins decided the puddles were better for sailing paper boats than for avoiding." Their easy banter continued as the settlement of Willow Creek appeared on the horizon, a small cluster of buildings nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. It wasn't much, but to Josephine it looked like salvation. The blacksmith, a burly man named Peterson, confirmed Quinn's assessment of the wheel. "It'll need to be replaced entirely," he said, scratching his beard. "I can have a new one ready by tomorrow afternoon." Josephine's heart sank at the delay. "Is there someplace in town I can stay for the night?" "Mrs. Abernathy takes in boarders," the blacksmith replied. "Clean place, fair prices. 2 doors down from the general store." After securing accommodations and seeing to her horses, Josephine found herself standing awkwardly with Quinn outside the boarding house. The sun was setting, painting Willow Creek in warm hues of orange and gold. "I can't thank you enough for your help today," she said sincerely. Quinn shifted his hat in his hands. "It was nothing, Miss Caldwell. Josephine, please," she insisted. "After today, I think we've moved past formalities." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Josephine, then." He hesitated, then added, "Would you allow me to buy you dinner at the cafe? Small place, but the food's decent from what I hear." She should have declined. Proper young ladies didn't dine with men they just met, especially not cowboys of unknown background. But there was nothing improper in Quinn's invitation, just simple kindness, and Josephine found herself nodding. "I'd like that very much," she said. The cafe was indeed small. Just 6 tables squeezed into a narrow room, but the smell of fresh bread and beef stew made Josephine realize how hungry she was. They were seated by a window overlooking the main street, the glass reflecting the soft glow of oil lamps. Over bowls of hearty stew and crusty bread, they continued their conversation from the trail. Quinn spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his decision to head west at 14 with nothing but a borrowed horse and a determination to make his own way. "My mother cried for a week before I left," he admitted, "but my pa understood. He'd done the same thing in his day, though he eventually circled back home. I write to them when I can, send money when I have it." "Do you ever visit?" Josephine asked. A shadow crossed Quinn's face. "Not in a while. Pa passed 3 years back. Ma lives with my sister now in Kansas City." "I'm sorry about your father," she said softly. Quinn nodded his thanks. "He was a good man, taught me everything important: how to work hard, treat people fair, stand by my word." He looked up from his stew. "What about your family? You mentioned your mother." Josephine pushed a piece of bread around her plate. "Both my parents are gone. Influenza took them within a week of each other when I was 16. I have an aunt in Philadelphia, but we're not close." "That's a heavy burden to bear so young," Quinn said, his voice gentle. "It was," she acknowledged, "but it taught me self-reliance, which has served me well." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. The moment was broken by the arrival of apple pie, still warm from the oven. As they savored the dessert, Quinn casually mentioned that he was thinking of staying in Willow Creek an extra day to rest his horse. "No sense in pushing on when I've got no firm destination," he said, watching her reaction. Josephine tried to ignore the flutter of pleasure at the thought of seeing him again tomorrow. "That seems sensible," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. After dinner, Quinn walked her back to the boarding house, their steps slow in the cool evening air. At the door, he removed his hat again, holding it against his chest. "Thank you for a pleasant evening, Josephine," he said. "Thank you for the meal," she returned, "and everything else today." He nodded, seeming reluctant to leave. Finally, he said, "I'll check on your wagon tomorrow, see how Peterson is coming along with that wheel." "You don't have to do that," she protested half-heartedly. A smile played around his mouth. "I know. Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Quinn." As she climbed the stairs to her rented room, Josephine tried to dismiss the warmth that had settled in her chest. Quinn was just being kind, she told herself. She'd be foolish to read anything more into it, especially when they would part ways tomorrow or the day after, likely never to cross paths again. Yet as she prepared for bed in the small, sparse room, Josephine couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to have someone like Quinn in her life, someone steady and kind, with laughter in his eyes and capable hands that could fix what was broken. It was a dangerous line of thinking, she knew. She had worked too hard and planned too carefully to let a chance encounter with a handsome cowboy derail her future. Denver awaited, with its promise of independence and purpose. That was what mattered, not the way her heart had quickened when Quinn smiled at her across the dinner table. With that firm reminder, Josephine extinguished the lamp and settled into bed, exhaustion from the day's events quickly pulling her toward sleep. Her last conscious thought was that at least she would see him one more time before continuing her journey. Morning brought the sounds of the small town coming to life, wagon wheels on packed dirt, shopkeepers calling greetings, a dog barking somewhere nearby. Josephine dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a deep green that brought out the hazel in her eyes, then chided herself for the vanity. After a breakfast of eggs and biscuits served by Mrs. Abernathy, Josephine set out to check on her wagon. The blacksmith shop was already busy, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on metal echoing down the street. Peterson looked up as she entered, nodding in recognition. "Morning, Miss Caldwell. Your wheel's coming along. Should be ready by 4 or so." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate your quick work." "Not just my work," the blacksmith grunted, gesturing toward the back of the shop. "Your cowboy friend's been lending a hand since dawn." Sure enough, Quinn was there, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he carefully shaped a wooden spoke. He looked up at Peterson's words, a smile lighting his face when he saw Josephine. "Good morning," he said, setting aside his tools. "Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, inexplicably pleased to see him. "You didn't have to help with the wheel," Quinn shrugged. "Wanted to make sure it was done right. No offense to Peterson," he added with a nod to the blacksmith. "None taken," Peterson rumbled. Extra pair of hands means it gets done faster. I'm grateful to you both, Josephine said sincerely. After arranging to return for the wagon later, Josephine found herself walking alongside Quinn toward the general store. I need to restock my supplies before leaving, she explained. Smart thinking, Quinn agreed. Never can be too prepared on the trail. The general store was well stocked for such a small settlement, offering everything from canned goods to fabric to ammunition. As Josephine selected flour, coffee, and other essentials, Quinn browsed nearby, occasionally offering suggestions based on his own trail experience. Beef jerky's better than salt pork for traveling, he advised. Doesn't spoil as quick. I bow to your expertise, Josephine replied with a smile, adding the jerky to her basket. When they reached the counter, Quinn casually added a small sack of peppermint candies to her purchases. At her questioning look, he shrugged. Long days on the trail are sweeter with something to look forward to. It was such a thoughtful gesture that Josephine felt a lump form in her throat. She busied herself with counting out money to pay the shopkeeper, not trusting her voice. Outside, they paused in the shade of the store's awning. I should check on my horses, Josephine said reluctantly, not wanting their time together to end just yet. I already did, Quinn admitted. Gave them fresh hay and water this morning. She blinked in surprise. You did, he nodded, looking almost embarrassed. Figured you'd want to know they were cared for. That was very considerate, Josephine said softly. A moment of silence stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something unspoken. Finally, Quinn cleared his throat. There's a small lake just outside town, he said. Pretty spot. Thought you might like to see it. Pass the time until your wagon's ready. Josephine hesitated. Spending more time with Quinn was too tempting. She should focus on preparing for the remainder of her journey, not dallying with a cowboy she'd known for barely a day. Yet the prospect of sitting alone in her boarding house room held little appeal compared to Quinn's company, and they would be in public view, she reasoned. Nothing improper about a walk to a nearby lake. That sounds lovely, she heard herself say. Quinn's face brightened. Great. Let me just grab something from the livery, and I'll meet you back here in 10 minutes. Before she could respond, he was striding down the street, his long legs eating up the distance. Josephine shook her head, bemused by his enthusiasm but finding it infectious nonetheless. True to his word, Quinn returned promptly, carrying a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Lunch, he explained, seeing her curious glance. Mrs. Abernathy was kind enough to pack us some sandwiches and apple tarts. You've thought of everything, Josephine observed, touched by the consideration. They walked side by side through town, and then along a well-worn path that wound through stands of cottonwood trees. The day was warm but not uncomfortable, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves above them. Conversation flowed easily between them, as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. Quinn told her about the best parts of cowboy life, the satisfaction of a good day's work, the camaraderie around the campfire, the spectacular sunrises viewed from horseback. In turn, Josephine shared stories of her teaching experiences, the joy of watching a child grasp a difficult concept, the creative ways she'd found to make learning engaging. You really love it, don't you? Quinn observed as they emerged from the trees to see a small lake sparkling in the sunlight, its surface rippling gently in the breeze. Teaching. Yes, I do, Josephine confirmed. It feels like a calling, not just a job. That's how I feel about ranching, Quinn said, leading her to a grassy spot near the water's edge. There's nothing like working with the land and the animals, being part of something bigger than yourself. He spread the oilcloth on the grass, gesturing for her to sit. As they ate their sandwiches, Josephine found herself studying Quinn's profile, the straight nose, the strong jaw softened by the hint of a smile that seemed perpetually ready to emerge, the way the sunlight brought out gold highlights in his brown hair. "Why haven't you settled on one ranch?" she asked suddenly. "Bought land of your own?" Quinn took a thoughtful bite of his sandwich before answering. "Never seemed to stay in one place long enough, or maybe never found the right place to stay." He glanced at her. "But I've been thinking about it more lately. Man gets tired of having no roots." "Where would you settle if you could?" Josephine asked, genuinely curious. "Somewhere with good water and grass, room for cattle to graze, maybe near mountains like here in Colorado." He leaned back on his elbows, looking out over the lake. "What about you?" "Denver's your destination, but is it home?" Josephine considered the question. "I'm not sure I know what home feels like anymore," she admitted. "After my parents died, nowhere has felt quite right." Quinn's gaze was steady on her face. "Home isn't always a place," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's a feeling, or a person." The words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that Josephine wasn't ready to examine too closely. She busied herself with the apple tart, savoring the sweetness as she gathered her thoughts. "That's a lovely sentiment," she said finally, "but difficult to achieve when one is constantly moving." Quinn nodded, accepting her deflection without comment. They finished their meal in companionable silence, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface. As they packed up the remains of their lunch, Quinn said casually, "I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," Josephine teased, earning a chuckle, "so I've been told." He met her eyes, suddenly serious. "I'm headed south, but there's nothing stopping me from going west first. Denver's not that far out of my way." Josephine's heart gave a peculiar leap. "What are you saying?" Quinn stood, offering his hand to help her up. "I'm saying that wagon wheel of yours might hold to Willow Creek, but who's to say another won't break before you reach Denver?" Dangerous for a lady to travel alone. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to pull her to her feet. "Are you offering to escort me?" "If you'd allow it," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'd feel better knowing you arrived safely." Josephine didn't immediately withdraw her hand from his, the warmth of his calloused palm against hers sending a thrill up her arm. "That's very gallant of you, Quinn, but I wouldn't want to impose on your plans." "No imposition," he assured her. "Like I said, no firm destination at the moment." She should refuse. Josephine knew. Accepting would only deepen whatever was growing between them, making their inevitable parting in Denver all the more difficult. Yet the prospect of traveling the remaining distance with Quinn rather than alone was undeniably appealing. "If you're certain it's no trouble," she said finally, "I would welcome the company." The smile that broke across Quinn's face was like sunrise. "Then it's settled. We'll leave tomorrow morning bright and early." As they walked back to town, their hands occasionally brushing, Josephine told herself that her decision was purely practical. Having an experienced trail companion would make the journey safer and more pleasant. It had nothing to do with the way her pulse quickened when Quinn looked at her, or how his laughter made her feel light inside. Nothing at all. The wagon wheel was ready as promised, and by late afternoon, Josephine's vehicle was fully repaired and ready for travel. Quinn insisted on checking every inch of it, testing the axles and greasing the bearings until he was satisfied that it would make the journey to Denver without further incident. "Good work," he told Peterson, handing over payment that Josephine had provided. "Solid craftsmanship." The blacksmith nodded, pocketing the money. "Safe travels to you both." After ensuring that her horses were well rested and fed, they made arrangements to depart at dawn. Quinn would retrieve his own horse from the livery, and they would set out together for the remaining 50 miles to Denver. That evening they shared another meal at the cafe, joined by the local doctor and his wife who had heard about the stranded teacher and the cowboy who rescued her. Word traveled fast in small towns, and Josephine found herself blushing as Mrs. Lewis, the doctor's wife, praised Quinn's gallantry. "Not many men would stop to help a stranger these days," Mrs. Lewis said approvingly. "Too many rough characters on the trails." "I was just in the right place at the right time," Quinn deflected modestly. "Anyone would have done the same." "I wouldn't be so sure," Dr. Lewis countered. "You're a rare breed, young man." Josephine watched Quinn handle the praise with grace, neither false modesty nor pride coloring his responses. It struck her again how comfortable he seemed in his own skin, a man who knew his worth without needing to prove it to others. After saying goodbye to the Lewises, Quinn walked Josephine back to the boarding house one last time. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the velvet sky like diamond dust. "Thank you for today," Josephine said as they reached the door. "For everything." Quinn stood with his hat in his hands, a now familiar gesture that she found endearing. "My pleasure, truly." Impulsively, Josephine reached out and touched his arm. "I'm glad my wagon wheel broke when and where it did," she confessed. "Otherwise, we might never have met." In the dim light from the boarding house windows, she saw Quinn's expression soften. "Maybe some things are meant to be," he said quietly. For a heartbeat, Josephine thought he might step closer, might even kiss her. Part of her wanted to know if his lips would be as gentle as his hands, as warm as his smile. But he simply tipped his hat, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sleep well, Josephine. Dawn comes early." "Good night, Quinn." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Josephine's emotions were in turmoil. She was a practical woman, not given to romantic flights of fancy. Yet in less than 2 days, Garrett Quinn had upended her careful composure, making her question the solitary path she had chosen for herself. "It's just because he's been kind," she told herself as she prepared for bed. Anyone would feel gratitude in her position. The fact that he was handsome and charming only complicated matters. By the time they reached Denver, this strange attraction would fade, she was certain. They would part ways, and she would focus on building her new life as she had planned. This interlude, pleasant as it was just that, a brief moment of connection before they each continued on their separate journeys. With that resolution firmly in mind, Josephine extinguished her lamp and closed her eyes, determined to get a good night's rest before the day's travel ahead. Dawn broke clear and crisp, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold as Josephine made her final preparations for departure. Quinn was already at the livery when she arrived, saddling a sturdy bay gelding. He looked up at her approach, his face lighting with a smile that sent a traitorous flutter through her chest. "Morning," he greeted. "Ready for the trail?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, checking her horse's harnesses one last time. Within the hour, they had left Willow Creek behind, the wagon rolling smoothly along the trail toward Denver. Quinn rode alongside, occasionally ranging ahead to scout the path or circling back to check their rear. His vigilance made Josephine feel secure in a way she hadn't since leaving St. Louis. The day passed pleasantly, the miles unwinding beneath the wagon wheels as they talked of everything and nothing. Quinn pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a stand of aspens that would be golden come fall, the distant silhouette of the Rocky Mountains growing more defined as they traveled west. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch, sitting side by side on a fallen log. Quinn produced a battered harmonica from his saddlebag and played a jaunty tune that had Josephine tapping her foot in rhythm. "Where did you learn to play?" she asked when he finished. "Old cowhand named Blue taught me," Quinn replied, turning the instrument in his hands. "Said music makes the trail shorter and the night watches easier." He was right, Josephine said. It's lovely. Quinn looked pleased. Know any songs I could accompany you? Josephine hesitated, then nodded. A few. My mother used to sing Barbara Allen on winter evenings. Quinn smiled and raised the harmonica to his lips, playing the opening notes of the old ballad. Josephine's clear soprano joined in, her voice gaining confidence as the familiar melody carried her back to evenings by the hearth, her mother's voice twining with her own as her father listened with a contented smile. When the song ended, Quinn lowered the harmonica, his expression soft. "You have a beautiful voice." "Thank you," Josephine said, suddenly shy. "It's been a long time since I sang for anyone." "Their loss," Quinn said simply. He tucked the harmonica away and stood, offering his hand. "We should keep moving if we want to make camp before dark." As the afternoon wore on, the terrain began to change, becoming more rugged with occasional stands of pine and juniper breaking the expanse of prairie. They made good time, the repaired wagon performing admirably on the well-traveled trail. By sunset, they had reached a small creek that Quinn deemed a suitable campsite. "Good water for the horses, shelter from the wind," he explained, helping Josephine down from the wagon. "We should reach Denver by tomorrow afternoon at this pace." Tomorrow. The word struck Josephine with unexpected force. Their journey was nearly over, their time together drawing to a close. She pushed the thought away as she helped Quinn set up camp, gathering firewood while he saw to the horses and started a fire. Dinner was a simple affair, beans and bacon cooked in Quinn's trail-worn skillet, accompanied by the last of the bread from Willow Creek. As darkness settled around them, the campfire cast a warm glow on their faces, the crackling flames the only sound besides the occasional whicker of the horses or hoot of a distant owl. "Tell me about Denver," Quinn said, refilling their tin cups with coffee. "What do you know about the place?" Josephine cradled her cup, warming her hands against the evening chill. "Not much beyond what I've read or heard. It's growing rapidly. Gold and silver have brought prosperity. The school where I'll teach is newly built, funded by some of the successful miners and merchants who want their children educated properly." "You know where you'll live?" Quinn asked. "The school board has arranged accommodations with a widow named Mrs. Hollister," Josephine explained. "She has a room to let in her home near the school." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "Denver's changed since I was last there, becoming more civilized, they say, less of the wild boomtown it started as." "You've been there before?" Josephine asked, curious. "Passed through a few times," Quinn confirmed. "Delivered cattle to the stockyards once or twice." Josephine hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "What will you do after you've seen me safely to Denver?" Quinn poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling upward into the night sky. "Haven't decided yet," he said finally. "Might look for work around Denver for a while or head south as planned." He glanced at her. "What would you recommend?" The question caught her off guard. "I wouldn't presume to advise you on your path," she said carefully. A smile played around his mouth. "But if you were to presume—" Josephine looked into the flames, gathering her thoughts. "I would say that a man with your skills and character could find opportunity wherever he chose to look for it." "That's diplomatic," Quinn observed, a hint of amusement in his voice, "but not much of an answer." "What answer are you looking for?" Josephine countered, meeting his gaze. The firelight danced in Quinn's eyes as he considered her. "I'm wondering if you'd mind having me around Denver for a spell," he said finally, "or if you're eager to start your new life without reminders of the journey." The directness of the question left Josephine momentarily speechless. Quinn waited patiently, his expression open and undemanding. "I wouldn't mind," she said softly, surprising herself with the admission. "Having you around, that is." Something shifted in Quinn's face, relief, perhaps, or pleasure. "Good to know," he said, his voice equally soft. They sat in silence for a while, the unspoken possibilities hanging in the air between them like the sparks from the fire, bright with potential. Eventually, Quinn rose and began preparing their sleeping arrangements. He insisted that Josephine take the wagon bed while he would sleep on the ground nearby. "I've bedded down on harder ground than this," he assured her when she protested, "and it's proper this way." Josephine couldn't argue with his reasoning, though part of her wished she could sit by the fire with him longer, continuing their conversation into the night. Instead, she bid him good night and climbed into the wagon, where Quinn had arranged her blankets into a comfortable pallet. As she lay looking up at the star-strewn sky, Josephine contemplated the strange turn her journey had taken. She had set out from St. Louis prepared for independence, for a life defined by her own choices and efforts. She hadn't been looking for companionship, let alone the stirring of feelings that Quinn had awakened in her. Yet here she was, on the eve of reaching her destination, reluctant to see their paths diverge. It was foolish, she knew. They'd known each other for barely 3 days. Whatever she felt was surely just gratitude mixed with the intimacy that travel often fostered between strangers. But as sleep claimed her, Josephine's last conscious thought was a wish that their journey didn't have to end quite so soon. Morning brought a flurry of activity as they broke camp and prepared for the final leg of their journey. Quinn was oddly quiet, his usual easy conversation replaced by brief, practical exchanges. Josephine wondered if he regretted their candor of the previous evening, if he was already mentally distancing himself in preparation for their parting. The thought stung more than it should have. As they set out, the terrain became increasingly settled. They passed farms and ranches, the occasional cluster of buildings that marked small communities sprouting along the route to Denver. Traffic on the trail increased, wagons loaded with goods, riders on horseback, even a stagecoach that rattled past in a cloud of dust. "Getting close," Quinn observed as they paused to rest the horses around midday. "You'll be at your new home before sundown." Josephine nodded, trying to recapture the excitement she had felt when first accepting the teaching position. "It will be good to arrive," she said, not entirely convincingly. Quinn studied her face, a question in his eyes that he didn't voice. Instead, he handed her a canteen. "Drink. It's warming up." They continued on, the Rocky Mountains rising majestically in the western distance, while ahead, the growing sprawl of Denver began to take shape on the horizon. Josephine found herself stealing glances at Quinn, memorizing the way the sunlight caught in his hair, the set of his shoulders, the confident ease with which he sat his horse. It was ridiculous, this melancholy. She had achieved what she set out to do, reached Denver safely, ready to begin her new position. Quinn had been a welcome companion, but their brief acquaintance was never meant to be more than that. So why did her heart feel heavy as the outskirts of Denver grew closer? The city itself was larger and more developed than Josephine had expected. Wooden buildings lined the streets, many 2 or even 3 stories tall. There were proper sidewalks in the business district, and she could see church steeples rising above the rooftops. Wagons and carriages crowded the streets, and pedestrians hurried along the boardwalks with purpose. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Quinn remarked, noting her wide-eyed assessment. "Denver's grown considerably since I was last here." "It's impressive," Josephine agreed, feeling a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This bustling city would be her home now. Quinn guided them through the streets with surprising confidence, navigating toward the address Josephine had been given for Mrs. Hollister's home. The neighborhood they entered was respectable, with neat houses set back from the street, many boasting small gardens or picket fences. "There it is," Quinn said finally, pointing to a two-story house painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. "Number 412. Josephine's heart pounded as Quinn reined his horse alongside her wagon in front of the house. This was at the end of their journey together. Before she could speak, the front door opened, and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Miss Caldwell," she called, her face breaking into a welcoming smile. "Is that you?" "Yes, madam," Josephine confirmed, gathering her composure. "Well, praise be. We were starting to worry when you didn't arrive yesterday," Mrs. Hollister exclaimed, hurrying down the path to the gate. "The school board sent word asking if you'd arrived yet." "My wagon had a mishap on the trail," Josephine explained, climbing down with Quinn's assistance. "I would have been stranded if not for Mr. Quinn here." Mrs. Hollister's shrewd eyes assessed Quinn, who tipped his hat politely. "Well, isn't that fortunate?" she said, her tone suggesting she found the situation interesting indeed. "And mighty good of you, Mr. Quinn, to see our new teacher safely to her door." "My pleasure, madam," Quinn replied with easy charm. "Miss Caldwell's wagon needed repairs, so we were delayed a day in Willow Creek." The explanation seemed to satisfy Mrs. Hollister, who bustled forward to take Josephine's hand. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. Come in, come in. I've got your room all prepared and supper will be ready soon." She paused, looking at Quinn. "Will you be joining us, Mr. Quinn?" Quinn hesitated, glancing at Josephine. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hollister declared. "Any man who rescues our teacher deserves a good meal at the very least." Before either of them could respond, a young man came jogging down the street, calling out as he approached. "Mrs. Hollister, is that Miss Caldwell?" "It is indeed, Mr. Barton," the widow confirmed. The young man, perhaps in his early 20s, arrived slightly breathless. "Miss Caldwell, welcome to Denver. I'm Thomas Barton, clerk for the school board." He offered his hand to Josephine, who shook it politely. "Mr. Chambers sent me to check if you'd arrived and to invite you to dinner tomorrow evening to meet the rest of the board members." "Thank you, Mr. Barton," Josephine replied. "Please tell Mr. Chambers I would be delighted to attend." Thomas Barton nodded, then seemed to notice Quinn for the first time. "Oh, hello there. This is Mr. Quinn," Josephine introduced him. "He assisted me when my wagon broke down on the trail and was kind enough to escort me the rest of the way to Denver." "Very good of you, sir," Barton said, offering his hand. Quinn shook it briefly, his expression neutral. "Just glad to help," he said. Barton turned back to Josephine, his enthusiasm evident. "The school is ready for the term to begin next week. 28 students enrolled already, from ages 6 to 14. The building is brand new 2 classrooms, though we're only using one for now. Eventually, we hope to hire a second teacher for the older students." Josephine smiled, caught up in the young man's excitement despite her conflicted emotions about arriving. "It sounds wonderful. I look forward to seeing it." "I'd be happy to show you around tomorrow," Barton offered eagerly. "Say after lunch." "That would be lovely," Josephine agreed. Mrs. Hollister cleared her throat. "Well, that's all settled then. Now, Mr. Barton, if you'll excuse us, Miss Caldwell has had a long journey and needs to rest. You can tell her all about the school tomorrow." Barton looked momentarily disappointed but nodded. "Of course, forgive me." "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Caldwell." With a tip of his hat, he departed, casting one curious glance back at Quinn. "Now then," Mrs. Hollister said briskly, "let's get you settled, dear. Mr. Quinn, if you'd be so kind as to bring Miss Caldwell's trunk inside. Timothy, my neighbor's boy, can help with the wagon and horses. He works at the livery stable down the street." Quinn agreed readily. And soon Josephine found herself being ushered into the neat, comfortable house, while Quinn and the neighbor's son saw to her belongings and transportation. Mrs. Hollister showed Josephine to a pleasant room on the second floor, with windows overlooking a small garden behind the house. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall," she explained. "Hot water for bathing available on request. I serve breakfast at 7, lunch at noon for those who are home, and supper at 6 sharp." "It's lovely," Josephine said sincerely, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings: a bed with a colorful quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a small writing desk by the window, and a rocking chair in the corner. "Thank you for opening your home to me." "Happy to have you, dear Mrs. Hollister assured her. "Teaching's an important calling. Besides, it's nice to have young people around." She patted Josephine's arm. "Now I'll let you freshen up. Your trunk should be up shortly." When the older woman had gone, Josephine moved to the window, looking out at the garden below. Denver. She had made it. This room, this house, this city would be her home now. It was what she had wanted, what she had worked toward for months. So why did she feel as if she were losing something precious just as she gained her goal? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Hollister. Instead, Quinn entered, carrying her trunk with apparent ease. "Where would you like this?" he asked. "By the wall, please," Josephine directed, suddenly aware of how intimate it felt to have him in her bedroom, even with the door open and Mrs. Hollister presumably nearby. Quinn set the trunk down carefully, then straightened, looking around the room. "Nice place," he commented. "Yes," Josephine agreed. "Mrs. Hollister seems very kind." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. "Well," Quinn said finally, "I should let you settle in." Josephine nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Yes, of course." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Hollister invited me for supper," he reminded her. "But if you'd rather I didn't stay—" "No," Josephine interrupted quickly. "Please stay. I'd like that." The smile that crossed Quinn's face was worth any impropriety in her eagerness. "Then I'll see you at supper," he said. "I'll just go make sure your horses are properly settled at the livery first." After he left, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, her emotions in turmoil. She had expected to feel elated upon reaching Denver, triumphant at having completed her journey independently. Instead, she felt oddly bereft, as if something essential were slipping through her fingers. "It's just the fatigue of travel," she told herself firmly. After a good night's sleep in a proper bed, she would feel more like herself, excited about her new position, ready to establish herself in Denver society. She unpacked a fresh dress for supper, a simple blue cotton that was one of her favorites, and then set about washing away the dust of the trail. By the time Mrs. Hollister called her down to the dining room, Josephine had regained some of her composure, her hair neatly arranged, her appearance once again that of a respectable young teacher rather than a trail-worn traveler. Quinn was already seated at the table, his hair damp from his own ablutions, wearing a clean shirt that Josephine hadn't seen before. He rose when she entered, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," Josephine replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself." Mrs. Hollister bustled in with a steaming platter of roast chicken, interrupting the moment. "Sit, sit," she urged. "Food's getting cold." The meal was delicious roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread, a far cry from their simple trail fare. Mrs. Hollister kept the conversation flowing, asking about their journey, expressing appropriate shock at the broken wagon wheel, and sharing bits of local gossip to acquaint Josephine with her new community. "The school board's quite proud of the new building," she told Josephine. Mr. Chambers, he's the president, donated the land himself. His wife will likely invite you to tea soon. Influential family, the Chambers. I'll look forward to meeting them, Josephine said politely. Mrs. Hollister turned her attention to Quinn. And what about you, Mr. Quinn? Will you be staying in Denver long? Quinn glanced at Josephine before answering. I'm not certain yet, madam. Depends on what opportunities present themselves. Well, if you're looking for work, my brother owns the Double R Ranch about 10 miles outside town, Mrs. Hollister offered. Always looking for experienced hands, especially this time of year. I appreciate the information, Quinn said, his expression thoughtful. Might just look into that. Josephine tried to ignore the leap of hope in her chest at the possibility of Quinn remaining nearby. It was foolish to build expectations on such a tenuous foundation. As the meal concluded, Mrs. Hollister excused herself to the kitchen, tactfully leaving Josephine and Quinn alone in the dining room. Your landlady is quite the matchmaker, Quinn observed with a hint of amusement. Josephine groaned softly. Was it that obvious? Only to someone who was watching for it, he assured her, his eyes twinkling. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Will you really inquire about work at her brother's ranch? Josephine asked finally. Quinn considered the question. I might, he said. Sounds like decent employment and not too far from town. Not too far from you, his eyes seemed to say, though he didn't speak the words aloud. I would like it if you stayed, Josephine admitted softly. At least for a while, Quinn's expression softened. I'd like that too, he said, but I don't want to interfere with your new life here. That young Mr. Barton seemed quite taken with you already. Josephine laughed despite herself. Mr. Barton is enthusiastic about the school, that's all. If you say so, Quinn replied, clearly unconvinced. Mrs. Hollister returned with coffee and apple pie, ending their private conversation. As they enjoyed the dessert, Josephine found herself studying Quinn's hands, strong, capable hands that had fixed her wagon, played the harmonica, guided his horse with confident ease. Hands she had come to trust in a remarkably short time. After supper, Quinn announced that he should be going. I need to find lodgings for the night, he explained. The Grand Hotel is just 3 blocks over, Mrs. Hollister informed him. Clean rooms, reasonable rates. Quinn nodded his thanks. I'll head there then. At the front door, Mrs. Hollister discreetly excused herself, leaving Josephine and Quinn alone for their goodbyes. Thank you, Josephine said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. For the wheel, the escort, everything. Quinn stood with his hat in his hands, a now familiar pose that tugged at her heart. It was my pleasure, he said simply. Truly. They gazed at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Quinn cleared his throat. I'll come by tomorrow, he said, before you go to see the school with young Barton, if that's all right with you. I'd like that very much, Josephine replied, unable to hide her pleasure at the prospect. Quinn hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. His touch was gentle but firm as he raised her fingers to his lips, pressing a brief kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Josephine, he murmured. Sleep well. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding down the path to the gate. Josephine watched him until he disappeared around the corner, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. Later, lying in her comfortable bed in her new room, Josephine found her thoughts returning to the moment she had first seen Quinn approaching her stranded wagon, a chance encounter that felt increasingly like destiny. It was ridiculous, of course. She was a modern woman, educated and independent, not a heroine in a dime novel who falls for the first handsome cowboy who crosses her path. Yet as sleep claimed her, Josephine couldn't deny the hope blooming in her heart, hope that whatever was growing between them might have the chance to flourish here in Denver. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the sounds of the city filtering through her open window, wagon wheels on cobblestones, voices calling greetings, the distant whistle of a train. Josephine dressed carefully in a light yellow dress with white trim, suitable for meeting Mr. Barton at the school later, but also, she admitted to herself, chosen with Quinn in mind. Mrs. Hollister was already busy in the kitchen when Josephine came downstairs, the aroma of coffee and bacon filling the air. "Good morning, dear," the older woman greeted her. "Sleep well." "Very well, thank you," Josephine replied, accepting a cup of coffee. "Mr. Quinn seems like a fine young man," Mrs. Hollister remarked casually, turning bacon in a skillet. Josephine hid her smile behind her coffee cup. "Yes, he was very helpful during my journey," Mrs. Hollister hummed noncommittally. "Handsome too," she observed. "And those eyes." "A girl could get lost in eyes like that." "Mrs. Hollister," Josephine exclaimed, laughing despite herself. The widow winked at her. "Just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm blind, dear. Now, eggs scrambled or fried?" After breakfast, Josephine helped with the dishes, then settled on the front porch with a book, ostensibly to enjoy the morning air but primarily to watch for Quinn's arrival. She didn't have to wait long. He appeared just after 10, walking up the street with that easy stride that she had come to recognize. He wore a clean shirt and had trimmed his beard slightly, she noticed as he approached the gate. "Good morning," he called, raising his hand in greeting. "Good morning," Josephine returned, setting aside her book and rising to meet him at the gate. "Did you find accommodations at the hotel?" "I did," Quinn confirmed. "Decent room, comfortable enough. And have you had time to look into employment opportunities?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. A smile tugged at the corner of Quinn's mouth, as if he could read the hope behind her question. "As a matter of fact, I rode out to the Double R Ranch this morning, met Mrs. Hollister's brother, Mr. Richardson." Josephine's heart quickened. "And he offered me a position as assistant foreman," Quinn said, a note of pride in his voice. "Starting immediately if I want it." "Quinn, that's wonderful," Josephine exclaimed, genuinely delighted for him. "Assistant foreman is a significant position," he nodded, clearly pleased by her reaction. "It's good work with decent pay and a cabin of my own on the property. Mr. Richardson seems like a fair employer." "Will you accept the offer?" Josephine asked, the question that mattered most to her. Quinn's eyes held hers, warm and intent. "I'm considering it very seriously," he said. "There's a strong incentive to stay in the area." The way he looked at her left no doubt as to what, or rather who, that incentive was. Josephine felt warmth bloom in her cheeks. "I'm glad," she said softly. "That you're considering it, I mean." They stood at the gate, the morning sunshine warm on their faces, possibility humming in the air between them. "I thought I might show you around Denver a bit before your appointment with Mr. Barton," Quinn suggested. "If you'd like." "I'd enjoy that very much," Josephine replied. After informing Mrs. Hollister of their plans, which the widow approved with poorly disguised delight, they set off down the street. Quinn offered his arm, and Josephine took it, conscious of the propriety of being seen on the arm of a man she had known for such a short time, but unwilling to forego the pleasure of his company. Denver was a fascinating blend of frontier town and emerging city. Quinn guided her through the main business district, pointing out landmarks: the courthouse, the newspaper office, the telegraph station. They paused at a confectionery shop, where Quinn insisted on buying Josephine a small bag of chocolates. "Sweet treats for a sweet lady," he said with a smile that made her heart flutter. As they walked, Josephine found herself drawn as much to her companion as to the sights of the city. Quinn moved with confidence through the busy streets, nodding greetings to those he recognized from his previous visits to Denver. He had a natural charm that put people at ease, evident in the way shopkeepers responded to his questions or passers-by returned his friendly nods. "You seem to know your way around well for someone who's only passed through a few times," Josephine observed as they turned onto a tree-lined avenue. Quinn chuckled. "I have a good memory for places," he said, "and I've always liked Denver. It has character, not too refined, not too rough." "A bit like you," Josephine remarked without thinking. Quinn looked at her, a spark of pleasure in his eyes. "Is that how you see me, Josephine?" She nodded, unabashed. "You have a foot in both worlds, the refinement of education and manners, but the practicality and strength of a man who works with his hands. It's appealing." "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me," Quinn replied, his voice low and sincere. They had stopped walking, standing beneath the dappled shade of a cottonwood tree. For a moment, Josephine thought Quinn might kiss her right there on the public street. Part of her wished he would, propriety be damned. Instead, he reached up to gently brush a leaf that had fallen onto her hair, his fingers lingering for just a heartbeat. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. "You don't want to be late for your meeting with Mr. Barton." The moment broken, they turned and made their way back toward Mrs. Hollister's house, arriving just as Thomas Barton was coming up the path. "Miss Caldwell," the young man greeted her enthusiastically, then nodded to Quinn with considerably less warmth. "Mr. Quinn." "Mr. Barton," Quinn returned evenly. Josephine felt the tension between the two men and hurried to smooth it over. "Quinn has been kindly showing me around Denver," she explained. "I'm looking forward to seeing the school now." Barton's expression brightened. "You'll be impressed, I promise. The building is the finest in the county." "I'm sure it is," Josephine agreed. She turned to Quinn. "Will I see you later?" Quinn nodded, his eyes communicating more than his words. "I'll call this evening if that's acceptable." "Very acceptable," Josephine confirmed, ignoring Barton's poorly disguised frown. With a tip of his hat to them both, Quinn departed, leaving Josephine with the eager school board clerk. As they walked to the school, Barton kept up a steady stream of information about the building, the curriculum, and the students. But Josephine found her thoughts drifting repeatedly to Quinn, and the possibility that he might truly stay in Denver, or at least nearby. The school was indeed impressive, a handsome brick building with large windows and modern furnishings. Josephine admired the classroom where she would teach, with its rows of new desks, ample blackboard space, and even a small library of textbooks and readers. "The board has spared no expense," Barton told her proudly. "Education is the future of Denver, they say." "It's wonderful," Josephine agreed sincerely. "I'm honored to be entrusted with such a fine facility." Barton showed her the rest of the building, including a small office that would be hers, then invited her to join him for tea at a nearby cafe. Josephine accepted, aware that it would be politically unwise to refuse the school board clerk's hospitality on her first day in town. Over tea and sandwiches, Barton proved to be an informative if somewhat tedious companion. He was clearly intelligent and dedicated to education, but his conversation lacked the easy charm and quiet humor that made Quinn such a pleasure to talk with. "If you don't mind my asking," Barton said as they finished their tea, "how well do you know Mr. Quinn?" Josephine considered her answer carefully. "We met when my wagon broke down," she said truthfully. "He's been very kind and helpful." Barton nodded, a slight frown creasing his brow. "No doubt. It's just, cowboys aren't generally considered suitable companions for ladies of your standing, Miss Caldwell, especially in Denver society." Josephine felt a flare of irritation at his presumption. "I judge people by their character, Mr. Barton, not their occupation," she said coolly. The young man had the grace to look abashed. "Of course. Forgive me if I overstepped." The remainder of their time together passed pleasantly enough, though Josephine was relieved when they finally parted ways outside Mrs. Hollister's house, with Barton reminding her of the dinner with the school board the following evening. Mrs. Hollister greeted her return with interest, eager to hear about the school and, Josephine suspected, about her morning with Quinn. After satisfying the widow's curiosity on both counts, Josephine retreated to her room for a rest before supper, her mind full of the day's events and anticipation of Quinn's evening visit. She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, Mrs. Hollister was knocking at her door, announcing that supper would be ready in half an hour and that Mr. Quinn had arrived. Josephine sat up quickly, smoothing her hair and dress before hurrying downstairs. Quinn stood in the parlor, hat in hand, looking somewhat nervous until he saw her. Then his face relaxed into that warm smile that seemed reserved just for her. "How was the school?" he asked as she joined him. "Impressive," Josephine replied honestly. "Everything a teacher could hope for." "And young Mr. Barton?" Quinn inquired, a hint of something jealousy in his tone. Josephine suppressed a smile. "Very informative about the school board's expectations." "I'm sure he was," Quinn murmured. Supper was a lively affair, with Mrs. Hollister drawing Quinn out about his meeting with her brother and the position at the Double R Ranch. Josephine listened with growing delight as Quinn described the ranch and his duties as assistant foreman, speaking with genuine enthusiasm about the opportunity. "So you'll be accepting the position?" Mrs. Hollister asked directly. Quinn glanced at Josephine before answering. "Yes, madam, I believe I will. Mr. Richardson asked me to start next week after the cattle drive returns." "Excellent," Mrs. Hollister exclaimed. "I'll let Robert know you've accepted. He'll be pleased. Good help is hard to find these days. After supper, Mrs. Hollister again tactfully made herself scarce, claiming fatigue and retiring to her room, leaving Josephine and Quinn alone in the parlor. The evening was warm, and they moved to the front porch, where a gentle breeze offered relief from the day's heat. They sat side by side on the porch swing, not quite touching but close enough that Josephine could feel the warmth radiating from Quinn's body. The street was quiet, most of the neighbors having retreated indoors as twilight deepened into evening. "So," Josephine said softly, "you're staying?" Quinn nodded, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "I'm staying," he confirmed. "The position is a good one, and—" He hesitated, then turned to face her. "And I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Josephine." The simple honesty of his words took her breath away. "I'm not ready for that either," she admitted. Quinn reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "I know it's fast," he said. "We've known each other less than a week. You probably think I'm crazy." "If you are, then we're both afflicted," Josephine replied with a small smile. "Because I feel it too, this connection between us." Relief washed over Quinn's face. "I've never believed in love at first sight," he said quietly. "Always seemed like nonsense from dime novels. But when I saw you by that broken wagon, something inside me just knew you were important. Special." Josephine's heart raced at the word love, though Quinn hadn't explicitly applied it to his feelings for her. "I felt it too," she whispered. "Not right away, perhaps, but by the time we reached Willow Creek, I knew there was something different about you, about us." Quinn's hand tightened around hers. "I don't want to rush you," he said earnestly. "You're just starting your new life here, and I respect that, but I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it." Josephine felt a smile bloom across her face. "I would like that very much," she said. The joy that lit Quinn's eyes was answer enough, but he leaned closer, his free hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "May I?" he murmured. Josephine nodded, her heart pounding as Quinn closed the distance between them. His lips touched hers softly at first, a gentle question, then with growing confidence as she responded. The kiss was sweet and tender, a promise rather than a demand, and when they parted, Josephine felt as though something essential had clicked into place in her world. "I've wanted to do that since Willow Creek," Quinn confessed, his voice husky. "I'm glad you waited," Josephine replied. "This moment was worth the anticipation." They sat together on the porch swing until the stars emerged in full glory above, talking of small things and large, their hopes, their histories, their dreams for the future. When Quinn finally rose to leave, promising to call again the following day, Josephine felt a certainty she had never expected to find so far from her original home. The next weeks passed in a whirl of activity. Josephine began her teaching duties, quickly winning the respect of both her students and the school board with her competence and dedication. Quinn started work at the Double R Ranch, impressing Mr. Richardson with his knowledge of cattle and natural leadership abilities. They saw each other whenever possible: Sunday afternoon rides into the countryside, evening walks through Denver, occasional dinners at Mrs. Hollister's table. Quinn attended church with Josephine, causing a stir among the congregation with his attentive manner and obvious admiration for the new teacher. Tongues wagged, of course. The pretty young teacher and the cowboy foreman were subjects of considerable interest in Denver society. Thomas Barton made his disapproval clear with pointed comments about suitable companions, while Mrs. Chambers, the school board president's wife, took Josephine aside at a tea to express concern about her association with a common ranch hand. Josephine met these challenges with quiet dignity, neither apologizing for her choice nor allowing others to dictate her heart's direction. Quinn, for his part, was scrupulously respectful of her position, always properly dressed when in town and unfailingly polite to even those who looked down their noses at him. As summer turned to fall, their feelings for each other deepened beyond the initial attraction into something more profound. They learned each other's strengths and flaws, their habits and preferences, the stories that had shaped them into the people they were. Josephine discovered that Quinn had a quick mind that devoured books whenever he could get them, that he wrote poetry he showed to no one until her, that he had once dreamed of being a doctor before financial necessity set him on a different path. Quinn learned that Josephine had a mischievous streak beneath her proper exterior, that she could outride many men despite her city upbringing, that she collected pressed flowers from every place she had ever lived as touchstones of memory. One crisp October evening, nearly 4 months after their first meeting, Quinn invited Josephine for a special dinner at Denver's finest restaurant. He arrived at Mrs. Hollister's door in a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more handsome than Josephine had ever seen him. "You're beautiful," he said when she appeared in a dark green silk dress that had been her one extravagance upon receiving her first teaching salary. "You're rather dashing yourself," she returned, taking his offered arm. The restaurant was elegant, with white tablecloths and crystal glasses that sparkled in the gaslight. Quinn had arranged for a private table in a corner, away from curious eyes. He seemed nervous, Josephine noticed, fidgeting with his silverware and drinking more water than usual. After they had finished their meal, Quinn reached across the table to take her hand. "Josephine," he began, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she said softly, her heart beginning to race as she sensed the importance of the moment. Quinn took a deep breath. "When my path crossed yours on that trail, I had no destination in mind. I was just drifting, looking for the next job, the next trail to follow." But now, he squeezed her hand. Now I know exactly where I want to be, and that's wherever you are. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes as Quinn released her hand, reached into his pocket, and withdrew a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a single pearl set in gold. "Josephine Caldwell," he said, his voice steady now, filled with love and certainty. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up within her, so intense it was almost pain. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Quinn. Yes, I will marry you." Quinn's face transformed with happiness. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Their kiss was tender yet passionate, a sealing of promises and a glimpse of the future they would build together. Later, as they walked hand in hand back to Mrs. Hollister's house, the autumn moon lighting their way, Josephine marveled at the twist of fate that had brought them together. "You ever think about what would have happened if my wagon wheel hadn't broken?" she asked. "If you hadn't come along that trail at just that moment?" Quinn considered the question, his face thoughtful in the moonlight. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Some things are just meant to be." Josephine squeezed his hand, remembering his words from that first day. "Like you said when you fixed my wheel, I'll follow you home." Quinn smiled, drawing her closer as they walked. "And I always keep my promises, Josephine. Always." They were married the following spring in Denver's stone church, with Mrs. Hollister beaming in the front pew and Mr. Richardson standing as Quinn's best man. Josephine wore white lace with pearl buttons, carrying wildflowers that reminded her of those that had grown along the trail where they first met. With her teaching salary and Quinn's earnings as now head foreman of the Double R, following Mr. Richardson's promotion of his trusted assistant, they purchased a small house on the outskirts of Denver close enough for Josephine to continue teaching, yet near enough to the ranch for Quinn's work. Their home became known for its warmth and hospitality, open to cowboys and society ladies alike. And if some of Denver's elite raised eyebrows at the teacher who had married a cowboy, they eventually had to admit that the Quinn marriage was one of the happiest and most successful in the community. 2 years after their wedding, Josephine gave birth to a son they named James after her father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 18 months later. Quinn proved to be as skilled a father as he was a foreman, gentle yet firm, teaching his children to ride almost before they could walk. Josephine continued teaching until Elizabeth's birth, then devoted herself to raising their children and establishing a small school in their home for ranch children who lived too far from town to attend regularly. Her unofficial prairie school became so successful that the Denver School Board eventually offered funding to make it official, allowing Josephine to combine her love of teaching with her family responsibilities. As the years passed, their love deepened and matured, weathering the inevitable challenges of life drought years when the ranch struggled, a severe illness that nearly took young James from them, the passing of dear Mrs. Hollister, who had become like a mother to them both. Through it all, they remained each other's steadfast companions, their partnership a testament to the truth of Quinn's instinct when he had first spotted Josephine's stranded wagon on the trail to Denver. On their 10th anniversary, Quinn surprised Josephine with a special gift, a small wooden wagon wheel, expertly crafted by his own hands, with their initials and wedding date carved into its center. "To remind us how it all began," he said, as she admired the workmanship. "With a broken wheel and a promise to follow you home." Josephine placed the miniature wheel on their mantel, where it remained for all the years that followed, a symbol of chance encounters that become destiny, of journeys that lead exactly where they're meant to. of love that begins with a simple act of kindness on a dusty trail. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings of their life together, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Quinn would take out his old harmonica and play the folk songs they had shared on that first journey to Denver. Josephine would join in, her voice still clear and sweet, and they would remember the young teacher and the drifting cowboy who had found in each other the home they had each been seeking all along. Their story became something of a legend in the growing city of Denver, and the surrounding ranchlands the tale of the stranded teacher, the broken wagon wheel, and the cowboy who had fixed it with skilled hands and a promise that had lasted a lifetime. "I'll follow you home,"